Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the session Making Energy Models More Relevant for Policy Making. It's the parallel session, one of the first in this year's EMP conference. I hope that you enjoyed the speakers in the morning. My name is Andrzej Ceglarz, and I will be facilitating and chairing this session. The idea with organizing this session was a collaborative endeavor that we did together with colleagues from Institute of Advanced Sustainability Studies in Potsdam and from the Techno-Economics of Energy Systems Laboratory at University of Piraeus, working as a team in as a part of the Sentinel project, where we investigated some aspects related to energy modeling and policy making. Before we start with the session, I would like to introduce some house rules. So I would ask all our participants to stay muted, to turn your camera on if it's possible, so we could see each other. I would like to ask you to use the chat functions, if you have some questions or you would like to comment. And you can also use the reaction function of Zoom if you like to express some of your reactions. Yes, and I would like to ask you not to raise hands. This, since a big part of this session will be a facilitated discussion, and this option of raising hands is foreseen only for our speakers. The last thing is I would like to ask you to rename yourself, so you could put your full name and institution. So before we start, I would like to give the floor to my colleague Vasilis, in order to ask you some questions. So I'm stop sharing my screen, and Vasilis, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Andrzej. Welcome, everyone. Very glad to be here with you, and let me just share my screen. So hopefully now we can all see my screen, right? So what we would like to ask you is to type in your browser in slido.com this password, or you can directly, scan the QR code with your phones here in the screen. And it would be very nice if you could just type a short answer to this question, which is, in your opinion, why are energy models used in energy policy? So again, it's a very straightforward process. I mean, you just type in your browser slido.com, you put this numerical password there, and then you go directly to the poll and you just type your answer. Or you can do that by your mobile phone directly by scanning this QR code. Perfect. I see we have already our first responses. Okay. Okay, so we have to help measuring the effects of the policy, for guidance, for informed decisions, to provide indicators that assist decision making, drive policy and decisions, give clarity to policy management, show impact of policies, future scenarios, improving the level of analysis, reach consensus on feasible targets. That is a nice one. Justify policy decisions. That's very interesting. I think we will say more about that in a few seconds. Understanding complexity, yes. Assess feasibility and cost of some scenarios. Find the optimum solution to the energy problem. highlight different pathways leading to similar outcomes. All these are very nice responses. Thank you very much. Compare different options by scenario. Prepare legislative proposals. True. Highlight different pathways leading to similar outcomes. Monitor the implementation of policies. That is also very interesting, yes. Evaluate benefits of flexibility solutions. That would be a more specific answer, but very, very true also. Eliminate ad hoc decisions, comparison of alternative options, identify different policy options. Okay, I think we have a lot of answers so far. So thank you very much all. And Andrei, the floor is back to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Vasilis. So this is not a coincidence that we wanted to activate you to answer this question, because with this session, we would like to start with a presentation of the result of our research that we have done as a part of the Sentinel project. And afterwards, based on this input, we will move to the facilitated discussion. So I will give now the floor to my colleague, Diana, who will guide us through this research.
Thanks a lot for the introduction, Andrei. So yes, welcome. I'm very glad that we can present you today some results of our recent study on how energy models and energy policy interact. Why did we conduct the study? Why is this interaction so relevant? Well, we know that real-world experimentation with the energy system is not or only hardly possible, and models can really be here our virtual laboratories to explore different decarbonization options and policies. We also know that models are increasingly used to support energy policy making. And our colleagues actually conducted a study among different modeling teams, and they found that 2/3 of the models have a direct or indirect policy impact. Modelers also want to support decision and policy making, which I think is good news, but they also want that they are appropriately used by the different decision makers. And this was actually our key motivation to have a closer look into the interaction between policy making and modeling processes. And we investigated here the twofold interactions. So first, we looked whether, how, and when models influence policymaking processes, but then also the other way around, whether, how, and when policymakers actually influence the design, use, and results of energy modeling. We used a simplified policy process and analyzed actually the different potentials for the use of models along the policy cycle, from target setting to policy formulation, implementation, and also policy evaluation, as you can see here. We did our study in 5 different European cases. First, we conducted a study in the European Union as a whole, then in Germany, Greece, Poland, and Sweden. And we decided to select these 5 different cases as really representatives of different policy traditions. We see that there are different views among the countries on the necessity and urgency of climate protection, and there are also different states of the energy transition. Within the different case studies, we had specific focus on different policymaking processes. In the EU, we investigated the revision of the renewable energy target for 2030. In Germany, we looked into the renewable energy feed-in reform in 2009. For Greece, we studied the decision to phase out lignite coal. In Poland, we looked into the obstruction of a stricter European national climate targets along a longer time horizon by Poland itself. And last but not least, in Sweden, we investigated the development of the climate policy framework and also beyond. How did we do that? First, we did a document review, looking into different policy documents and also modeling studies that were mentioned. And we conducted interviews with different stakeholders from policymaking, the energy industry, civil society organization, consulting, and also academics. So from both sides, modelers and users of the modeling results. Let's move on to some results. Just a snapshot here from the European Union, where we looked closer into the revision of the renewable energy target for 2030. In fact, for each of the 5 case studies, we did some policy tracing. And here you can see a result of the mapping from the timeline. On top in blue, you can see the policy making process. And down in green, you can see the modeling process. And what you can easily see from this figure here is that there was an interaction, an exchange between policymaking and modeling in this process from 2014 to 2019. So what we clearly can see here that with the Clean Energy for All Europeans package, really some modeling studies have been commissioned to really define and revise also the targets within. I would like to put specific attention here to this process. The European Parliament actually initiated a dialogue in 2018, and an ARENA modeling study was just published before that. And this modeling study said that a higher EU renewable energy target by 2030 is feasible, and this actually played a very important role in the negotiations. The result was that the European Parliament and the European Council actually agreed on a higher renewable energy target, moving up from 27% to 32% by 2030. One of the involved policymakers told us, it doesn't mean, however, that whatever comes from the modeling is automatically endorsed as proof by policymakers. But that's the ground. That creates a battlefield. And based on that, different opinions can be exchanged. But everything starts with the modeling. I think this quote very nicely underlines the importance of modeling in this process. Moving beyond the EU case, we also looked into the other country case studies and clearly found that energy models are used to support and inform policymakers along the different stages of the policy cycle. So from target setting to policy implementation, but also for ex-post assessment, as we found in the Greek case study, where actually the Greek government first decided to phase out lignite-9 before they started a big process of modeling to actually justify this decision. When we look into this interaction here between energy modeling and energy policy making, it seems to be particularly pronounced in jurisdictions with high climate ambitions, as we could see in the EU, Sweden, and also Greece after 2019. But we also found evidence for the other interaction. So policymakers sometimes influence the modelers and the modeling process, especially when it comes to assumptions and data to be used in the modeling studies, when it comes to define the exploration space, and also there are sometimes expectations when it comes to the modeling results. The latter seems to be particularly the case in jurisdictions with low climate ambitions, as we found earlier in Poland, or in highly conflict-laden processes, as we found in the context of the new feed-in tariff. So these are kind of our results, and I would like to hand over now to Vasilis to tell us a bit more what we think these results now imply.
Yes, thanks, Diana. So in terms of implications now of our work, going beyond the cases that we analyzed, we have a couple of them going through, better modeling practices and good and open science. So the first one would be that modelers should focus on producing more radical results that diverge from existing political agendas rather than producing results that stay within the current mainstream, only suggesting minor modifications, as we need more radical insights for meeting upcoming energy climate targets. In this context, energy systems modeling needs to expand its comfort zone by exploring extreme scenarios, disruptive innovations, and ambitious political agendas. And our study also showed that models can be also used to steer towards predefined policy agendas. In this aspect, modelers should be aware of their role in the political arena, being fully open and transparent about their work and exploring different energy futures. In this context now, the third implication of our work would be that the legitimacy of model-based policy advising stands and falls with the model's credibility. avoiding black box approaches of the past. Model transparency is imperative for creating trust between modeling teams and model users. And further building now on this point, while there is already a growing open modeling community and funding of open access models and platforms, we need to keep pushing forward to trigger a change in culture and further reward openness within academia. This will eventually allow models to become an even more useful instrument toward efficient decision making. At the same time, openness could create further opportunities for more transdisciplinarity, also supporting the involvement of different stakeholders in the modeling process through co-creative approaches to better support inclusive policymaking. Which brings us to our fifth and final application. Models should definitely not be perceived as a panacea. They are and should be only one of several inputs that serve to inform policy decisions. So if we go also to our last, yes, thanks, Diana. So please, you can find more information about our work if you visit our recently published scientific article in the Elsevier's Energy Research and Social Science Journal. So thank you very much for your attention. I think now we could go for a couple of questions.
We don't have anything in the chat yet, so if anyone has any questions, I can definitely write them in the chat. Otherwise, should we move on and keep that time for later?
Yes, but there's no questions. Maybe you come up with any of those and your comments in the meantime, just put them in the chat, and I will use this opportunity. So Diana and Vasilis, thank you for this presentation, and now we can switch to the discussion. I'm very happy to have a very I'm sharing the screen. Please tell me, can you see it? Perfect. Thank you very much. I'm very happy that we managed to invite very good speakers to join this session and to discuss about the interactions of energy modeling and policy making. And I will shortly introduce our speakers. So the first one is Alessia De Vita, who with her background is energy and process engineer from the Technical University in Berlin, and currently is a director and project coordinator in the energy and transport modeling teams of E3 Modeling, focusing on policy analysis and scenario design mainly for the PRIMES modeling team. Alessia has 11 years of experience in energy transport, economy, and environmental policy modeling and impact assessment studies, working on long-term strategies for the EU and individual countries. Alessia has collaborated on all major energy and climate policy packages of the European Union in the recent years, and her focus lies in the use of the modeling results for modeling analysis. Our second speaker, who was already present today in the plenary session, is Andreas Zucker, who represents the European Commission and works in the DG Energy in the team of economic analysis and foresight and recovery. Andreas previously worked for the Joint Research Centers to German utilities in corporate development and strategy, including research and development. And Andreas is a physicist by training. Our third speaker is Jörg Mullenhoff, who represents the civil society and currently works for Climate Action Network Europe, and where he works on EU energy scenarios and energy infrastructure. Jörg has more than 50 years of experience in working for associations and companies in the renewable energy sector in Germany, France, and at the EU level. Before working for Climate Action Network Europe, Jörg was the advisor at the German Renewable Energies Agency and advocated for citizens' access to renewable with EEUC, which is the European Consumer Organization. And by training, Jörg is a political scientist from the University of Munster. And our last speaker is Olivia Lebois, who works for RTE, the French electricity transmission system operator, and is an expert who will focus on sector coupling. Olivia is convener of the joint ENSO-E and ENSO-G scenario modeling process for the 10-year network development plan for 2022. And he has experience in electricity and gas systems modeling at the EU level. And he used to work for the gas industry in ENSO-G on the infrastructure assessment. So as you can see, we have very good speakers who could shed some light on this interaction between energy modeling and policy making. But before that, and I will stop showing my screen, I wanted to refer to the presentation done by Diana and Vasilis, who presented the results that energy models can be used in a very different way. And my first questions would be why actually they are so used so differently in policy making. And I would like to direct this question to Jörg. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Good afternoon from sunny Brussels. So as you have heard, I'm not a modeler by training. I'm just a social scientist, and with my social science background, I would interpret this question as a societal question. And I even dare to say that this question pushed hundreds of thousands of people to the streets during the past years, who were demonstrating, actually telling politicians, please follow science, follow climate science, follow what the IPCC integrated assessment models are telling us, implement that in policies. And that's what actually we as an umbrella organization of European NGOs are also pushing for here in Brussels in the policy sphere. So why are there these conflicts when the science tries to influence the world of politics, these spheres, how do they interact? Maybe the first reason why models have difficulties in being picked up in policymaking, the first reason might just be that they are extremely complex. And you know that politicians, policymakers, they prefer simple answers. They prefer black and white decisions, go left or go right. And there's unfortunately not much time and capacity when it comes to higher level decisions to consider different sensitivities, pathways, cost assumptions behind that, and so on. That's why the first reason why models have difficulties. Second reason might just be that policymakers, they are afraid of certain models, because when you really would fully take into account what certain models are recommending, then it would be obvious that many of our policies are lagging behind, that national governments and also EU institutions are not really up to the pace, to the challenge that we would need to see to be compatible with the Paris Agreement. And the third reason, that is maybe a simple but most important one, that relates to the power of the stakeholder that is using the model and that is using the findings and how they are used and presented actually in the policy sphere. Because we might have here in this room many very, very robust modelers who do this scientific work with a lot of accuracy. They publish articles in peer-reviewed journals. And that is, of course, absolutely correct. And that is how science should work. But maybe 2 weeks earlier, just before the European Parliament was to vote, take a decisive vote on a certain policy file, there was somebody else who organized a huge press conference in Brussels and presented some nicely designed charts that maybe show some figures that stem from a questionable model with questionable assumptions. But if there is a prominent testimonial, if there are nice fancy slogans around that, there is probably much more, these results unfortunately are much more heard potentially by the policymakers than the science that is going on more in the traditional science sphere, and that is not necessarily reflected in the policy making. And regarding this question of power, you also have, of course, a certain mandate for very clearly organized models. The role of models can be quite decisive and well formatted in policymaking. I'm thinking about, for example, the impact assessments that the European Commission is running for instance, defining the future greenhouse gas emission reduction targets of the EU, or also regarding other targets and policies to be evaluated. And there, of course, there is an institutional power, and that is correct, and that is fine, but unfortunately that limits also potentially certain discussions. That's why when we are looking back to the last impact assessment on the European Commission's 2030 greenhouse gas emission reduction target, the impact assessment was for sure very robust and very complete, but the setting, the input parameters allowed only to assess a certain range, a certain window of data, of values, and of potential outcomes, also looking on certain policies and not on other instruments, which meant that, for example, the demands from the European Parliament and from civil society were not really integrated. They were not assessed, and it would have been interesting to check also with this kind of modeling what would be the benefits of having a higher greenhouse gas emission reduction target of 60 or even 65% by 2030.
Okay, thank you very much for your intervention, Jörg. You underlined several interesting points, and you also mentioned you referred to the activity of the European Commission and the institutional power. And we have a representative of the European Commission among our speakers. So actually, Andreas, I would like to invite you to also to answer this question, respond what Jörg have said. Is it really like that from your experience that policymakers see the reality but only black and white, or are afraid or more ambitious targets? So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Andre. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, you are heard very well.
Okay, yeah, my apologies. Apparently there were some dropouts this morning. So yes, indeed, you introduced me. So indeed, I'm a natural scientist, not a social scientist, and I like to think in categories of Aristotle and Karl Popper. So, and I'm doing a job which consists of presenting evidence that is used by policymakers. So I'm not the policymaker myself, although I belong to a policymaking entity. Apologies for this color. It switched me off. But modeling is actually a tool. And modeling tools fulfill or need to fulfill to be used by the Commission two main criteria. And they are relevance and models need to be able to answer the right questions. And what do I mean with this? Let me first start with the relevance models, and because the question is often why Commission is using certain models and not others, and this is a view where I should correct maybe some perception. Commission is using through all the studies that we commission through calls for that you can find on our homepage, regularly published. So if you look at all the studies that we run over, let's say, a period of a commission, you have probably a large double-digit number of models involved. So I couldn't even tell how many, because we often launch studies and not modeling exercises. But of course, we have models which are used for the quantification, for the quantitative part of some impact assessments that we run. And what is important? Yeah, the models need to be relevant in terms of scope and format, and that is not so easy. Scope means they need to represent a certain geographic scope, including the, let's say, correct nomenclature. So you need to model the EU 27. You need to model sectors in the way that European reporting works. So you need to report sectors and activity within sectors according to definitions made by European statistics. You need to model in a time horizon that represents our policies. All this is not a given. You need to model, your model needs to report key performance indicators or policy variables that have been defined in previous directives or regulations, and not other variables. So that, of course, is quite a hard requirement for many models. And that is, of course, putting strain, or let's say putting an obligation on all model developers to, let's say, follow our rules, to follow the way the Commission is doing things. And it requires quite some investments. We understand that, but it is important for us because the second thing, because the consequence of this is that the model is able to answer the right question. Answering the right question does not only depend on the right format. The format is, let's say, conditio sine qua non, but the right question means that the model is able to frame a certain problem the way that it can actually answer the relationship between policy instruments that are available at European level and a policy goal at European level. This is important. There are valuable models which are important to develop for science purposes, but which lack some relevance for us because they would not answer a policy question that is available to Commission level or to European level policy making. And I just want to give an example. You can and you should actually run pure optimization models from time to time. But if our policy is not prescriptive in the way that we can then decide which technology should be given priority, but if market mechanisms are causing a certain technology, a certain choice, a certain behavior, and if, let's say, direct incentives are which we could have influence on which we want to study, if these are then driving the system in one direction or the other, then this is actually what we need to be able to model, and not necessarily from a top-down central planning perspective, which technology would yield a, let's say, least cost pathway. Another very important issue is, of course, our relationship to stakeholders, including civil society, as the previous speaker mentioned, whom we invite and whom we consult prior to our modeling, but also, of course, member states. So we cannot afford to put or to create a scenario in which a member state competence is overruled. So you will, of course, see nuclear energy in the energy mix of the member states who are pursuing this technology, and you will, of course, not see nuclear energy in member states that do not allow it. And we need to consult a large number of, because it doesn't stop with nuclear energy. It's just a very stringent example. But you need to consult quite a few choices with member states where they have competence before doing modeling for the purpose of testing action on a European level. Of course, from an academic point of view or from a member state point of view, the game is different. But the way we use models force us to do this. So therefore, these ideas of 100% renewable energy scenarios are pointless from our view, because it is not in our competence to propose such things. So what do we do? Actually, we do a lot of things, and we do different things. So the models we use,
Andreas,
are.
I'm
am I too long?
Yes, I'm sorry. I need to keep the time, and I would stop it here, and maybe you can add on that with your second intervention. But thank you for now for this input. And you also already mentioned about several important issues. You mentioned about this relevance, including scope and format, but also about the relationship to stakeholder. And in that context, I would like to give the floor to Olivia, who's also is to some extent representatives of stakeholders. It's and the industrial ones. And Olivia, so in your work, you also pay a lot of attention to scope, which is bigger than only 27 EU member states. And can you share your experiences and impressions and try to answer the question, like what was already mentioned several times, why some results of the modeling, so some opposing results of the modeling studies are used in the policy making, and some of them basically are not. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Much honored to be invited here to speak today. As a co-convener of the T1DP scenario building process, which is a joint process of ENTSO-E and ENTSO-G, we are clearly part of policy implementation. I will not pretend to say why some models are used or not, results are used or not used by policy makers, but I would say at least from a process where we try to define some possible pathways to be translated into scenario for infrastructure assessment purpose, because I think it's very important to link one scenario with the purpose of the scenario. It can be policy advocacy, so pushing for some solution. It can be something as neutral as possible, rather academic work, or it can be something with a well-defined objective, like it is for the impact assessment of policy, like the impact assessment scenario, or what we are.
Yeah, unfortunately, we lost you. You are frozen. So let us wait a few seconds. Maybe it will come back. No, it has not come back. So in that case, let us wait when Olivia will come back. But I would like to invite our next speaker to jump in, and then we will give the floor again to Olivier when he's back. I would like to invite Alessia to share her thoughts on this question.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting me. I prepared a couple of slides to guide me through the discussion myself. So it certainly links to what also Andreas was saying, and about probably the question also, which are the policy questions which are important now. And so the question is also, where are we at the moment with the policy discussion? We have been discussing about climate targets obviously for quite a while, after Kyoto, etc. And then the first studies for the 2020 packages in 2007-8, and then we have been studying the low carbon economy going all the way to 2050 instead of only to 2020 or 2030, and we have been expanding the time horizon throughout the studies that we have been doing, so going first only to 2030, then obviously to 2050, and now all the way to 2070. with the Clean Planet for All finally. And I think the analysis is always a view of the shorter term targets and then a view of the longer term targets. And then adjusting again the shorter term targets to adapt to the new long term targets which are being set. And I think the point where we are now is that we have more, I think, an agreement with the majority, at least, of stakeholders, and certainly in the areas where we are moving on the necessity to achieve carbon neutrality at the latest by 2050, as announced in the Paris Agreement. And I mean, there is the climate law in the EU, which should foster exactly this achievement. And I think the big question for us modelers, which might also go into the direction exactly on also seeing how extreme and complex this all becomes, is actually how we can achieve this carbon neutrality. What are the pathways and which are the milestones which are particularly important when achieving this? And for this, the questions are becoming more and more complex, because it is no longer a question of do we need to achieve, what is the general cost, how do costs compare between, let's say, overall arching without CCS or with or without nuclear, but it is really about seeing how the different how the energy transition is to be achieved, and then obviously for the entire economy as well. So what becomes very important, and what are the new questions which we are being asked as modelers in this, are obviously to represent also the actors' behavior when concerning investment decisions, and obviously the influence of policy instruments into the action of into the behavior of actors, and therefore to include this famous things for modelers which are called agent-based modeling within all the analysis. What becomes increasingly important is also the representation of infrastructure, which combined with the dynamics of market diffusion might drive or not more technological maturity and then a higher technological update. One of the big example for this would be the uptake of electric vehicles, which obviously can only work in compatibility with the development of a related charging infrastructure, but the same would be the case if one looks at hydrogen or other energy carriers which are not, let's say, compatible with today's infrastructure. But even the development of renewable energies, if we go to a more decentralized, or simply the positioning of power plants or large power production centers, might be moving from the traditional coal producing regions to the North Sea, and obviously there the representation of infrastructure becomes important, because that is also an essential component to allow us to take advantage of the infrastructure, of the energy sources which are being developed. The policy instruments which are being needed and the comparison of possible policy instruments need to be very detailed in the modeling, in order to understand how different policy instruments might be influencing the different decision makers, if we have standards versus price-based measures, where and in what sectors do the different policy instruments work best, and again, what are the impacts on the actors' decisions, and therefore on the investments and on the overall costs of the system. Other big questions are obviously the inclusion of markets, both electricity markets or gas markets, or the possible markets for new fuels which might emerge over time, or the change in markets from, let's say, from physical commodity markets rather to non-physical commodity markets, and the interactions between the different markets, because obviously we're going towards elements which are always more related to interaction between markets, which in the past might have been isolated, and through the famous issues such as sectoral integration become coupled between each other. The other question, which is maybe also what was indirectly being referred to as the new complexities by the first speakers, or the new trends and the technological trends, it is not only the issue of new technologies, but also of new trends which are emerging in society, which could be done such as elements such as digitalization or sharing economy, or the big complex issue of the circular economy. And the issue is then, which is obviously very important, is obviously to take advantage, and how is the best possible way to take advantage of the positive externalities deriving from the energy transition, so as not to see it only as a cost and as a burden, which has been done in the past, but really to understand what are all the positive externalities which derive from all the elements related to the energy transition and the transition towards carbon neutrality if one expands beyond. And the other essential element is obviously then the issue of the, am I talking too much?
Yes, I would. I have to interrupt you at this moment. So thank you very much for your intervention so far. I think that the slides that you have prepared are very good, and the rest we can keep also for the second round of the intervention. So please stop sharing your screen. And also in the meantime, Olivia managed to join us. I will invite you to finish your
Thank you, and sorry for the disconnection. So my point was insisting on the fact that there's no one-fit-all modeling approach, one-fit-all scenario. It has to fit the purpose of the scenario, and they may have many purposes. But from a more general perspective, we see that one of the big value of model is, in a world more and more complex, it has to be more complex in order to look for field of optimization through sector coupling, energy carrier coupling to efficiently achieve the carbon neutrality. It means that we have to put data of different sectors together. It's very difficult to anticipate the result, and modeling helps. Not that it provides always, especially the first time, a good answer, but it forces modelers and policymakers to ask themselves the right question. So it's like a sparring partner. So you have an idea in a very complex environment, you test it through modeling, and it gives you a view, is it good or not? And so I think it's very, or it confirms or not your intuition. Why it's very important to have transparency on the model, because we need to have everyone, every stakeholders improving their knowledge in modeling to better understand and then better trust the result. So it's why complex models like times, primes, they need not only transparency by not being a black box, but we need an effort of modelers to explain what they are doing. And we think that open source projects, Osmosis, for example, in that direction are very important, because we need to educate people, we need to educate ourselves, because it's something that otherwise people will not buy the result. In any case, model will always have limitation. They cannot explore pathways beyond the freedoms that have been given. It's not always easy to know in advance the freedom that has been given to them. And we also need to factor externalities ex post. It's something which is very difficult, and we see that people do not have expectation only regarding carbon neutrality. There's biodiversity, there's employment, so it makes these things very complex. There's also a risk of over-optimization, meaning that if you let a model decide, it may happen that a very small variation in input data between technologies will push the model only to a very limited set of solutions, and that's something that will not materialize. It does not translate in the fact that the more you use of a technology, or maybe the cost will decrease, but also you may have to use it beyond its natural scope of use. And it's also something that we've noticed in our processes. Of course, we tried to be very transparent on our methodology. We try to move the debate on input data rather than results. If people trust input data, trust the modeling approach, then they should trust the result. It's not exactly like that that things happen. And I fully understand is that too difficult just to give your say on a set of input data and trust the process. You want also to give your opinion, your expertise on the final picture, which is resulting from modeling. And it means that we need also to go beyond the modeling result. Modeling is only a support for the objective of the scenario. So, and given this difficulty, I suppose that policymakers are facing the same challenges as we are. And I think it's fully understandable they are not using everything, but we think it's very important to bring transparency. And for example, in our modeling processes, sometimes we will be happy to have more transparency on what are the impact assessment or the primes model, because we have to move from a European picture to a country-based picture, for example. It's not always easy. And that, of course, we encourage policymakers to release data that can be used as input for other modelers in order to save time.
Okay, thank you very much for your intervention, Olivia. I especially like the point that modelers and people involved in modeling should learn from each other, and I think this is an excellent opportunity, this conference and this session as well. And saying that, I would like to open the floor first to our speakers, whether you would like to comment on each of the interventions of your colleagues. If yes, please raise your hand. Okay, no one no one wants to comment, so I think you agree to many of your points. Maybe that will change in the second part. But there have been some questions in the chat that was controlled by my colleague Diana. So Diana, which questions would you address either to you, to presenters of the study at the beginning, or to our speakers?
Thanks, Andre. Yeah, thanks for all the questions. I think one I found really interesting, I would give back to our four speakers, actually considering that you already mentioned that there are different new requirements, and yes, there's also the importance to have actually the knowledge basis of the different models. What do you think? How should a modeler, policy maker, but also the interaction with other stakeholders change to increase the use of the modeling results, and maybe also to ensure that a more diversity set of modeling results is considered in the policymaking process? So about the interaction between modelers and policymakers and other stakeholders, what do you think? What is needed? Maybe short responses, I think, would be great. Whoever wants to start, please raise your hand.
No one is eager to start, but maybe I would ask Alessia to share her thought, because you worked a lot on this interface between modeling and policy law, and there is also Andreas who raised his head. So maybe Andreas first, and then Alessia, you might refer to what Andreas will say. So Andreas, the floor is yours.
Well, I mean, then I'm not going to make it too long for Alessia, but basically I would argue that we are already there. We're already on the way. What I tried to say just a minute ago is that there's a reason why models are used, and there are reasons why it takes long to establish a model. And if we want to overcome, there's no such thing, by the way, I just want to make that point, as questionable models. This term simply doesn't make sense. A model is not questionable. All models are wrong, some are useful, right? No, that's using a model requires very long-term investment. That's a bit the problem. You have upfront investment, take a longer time to get there, and not all, I would argue that not all parties that are developing models have the time to align to bring a model really to the point where it's usable, where it's useful. What we do at the Commission, just to make very short, we use several models, and there are models, also in-house models that we develop. It's just, it needs to be said, it's not something that happens from one day to the other. So that's maybe a very important conclusion. And the other is, of course, not all data needed is available yet openly. So I would say when most of the models developed, the openness of many institutions was much smaller than it is today. And finally, as I said in my pledge for common standards, that will also take time to develop. Of course, I mean, being compliant with Eurostat and other requirements is a minimum, but in order to be comparable. But I think the good news is there is an EU-funded project that will help do that, which is the just newly launched ECEMF, the forum for the energy and climate modeling forum that is just being launched. And I think that will answer some of those questions. But just in one sentence, it's a long way. It's a long way to have a model be ready for such a complex thing as policy advice.
Okay, thank you very much for your answer. And Alessia, would you like to refer to that? Would you like to add something?
Yes, I mean, I agree with, obviously, with all the points made by Andreas. And I also believe that, I mean, I am one of the primes modelers, and it is, I think there has been, we now work on a huge number of projects together with many other modelers in order to compare, learn from each other, etc., in order to improve the modeling. And on the other side, there is always the issue that the amount of data which is required to run a model such as primes, which has to answer the always more complex questions which are being asked. Because, as I was briefly mentioning in the presentation, it is the questions are changing over time, and to a certain extent they are becoming more complex. But as has also been mentioned, I mean, depending on the user of the model and depending on the questions which are being asked, there can be different levels of complexity which are required to answer those questions, depending on the stakeholders which will use the results, etc. So I think there are many different types of models used for different questions, obviously, and different levels of complexities which are required. But in our case, the questions which are often being requested by the European Commission simply get much more complex over time, and the level of detail which is required in order to see what is happening at the sectoral level is expanding significantly over time.
Okay, thank you very much for these statements. Are there any other reactions from our speakers to comment on that or to add something from their perspective? Yes, I see that Jörg raised his hand, so please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. The question on how should the interaction between modelers and policymakers could be improved. There you also should take into account that we as civil society often are questioned, and obviously we also have a role in explaining the energy transition, in enhancing public acceptance of all the investments, of the big fundamental changes of the energy system that are ahead. And we of course welcome a lot and appreciate that, for example, both the grid operators, ENTSO-E and ENSOC, massively improved the level of transparency of the access to the data, for example, in the TYNDP process. And we, of course, try to feed into this process and help to improve to a certain extent this modeling. But you need to take into account that still I'm speaking for a network of 180 environmental and development NGOs, and there are very few colleagues in those NGOs, in our member organizations, who are modelers or who can engage with a high quality input, who have really the capacity, the time to engage in that debate. We cannot do that full-time, unfortunately, and you need to factor in also in these processes of improving the interaction that certain stakeholders, certain players like environmental NGOs, we would need additional capacity building. Yeah, we cannot really play on a level playing field or interact like a scientific research institute that is dealing with these questions on an everyday basis. Just to remind that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Jörg. Any other reactions to that? Yes, I see one. Alessia raised her hand, so please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, just a small comment to the last thing. I mean, indeed, the issue of capacity is difficult. There aren't that many modelers. I mean, there are more and more modelers, but there aren't millions of them. And indeed, however, all the comments that we receive, and I mean, we have had interactions also with CAN in the stakeholder consultations that we have done. There, I mean, for all of us, I mean, the elements from industry which come in, because obviously as researchers also, we often have to rely, for example, on scientific publications to get some elements. And as we all know, that process is sometimes rather long. So whenever we do get direct feedback from stakeholders, this is always extremely valuable also for us as modelers, in order, for example, also from industrial stakeholders, in order to get much faster feedback. Obviously paying attention that one isn't totally biased in the feedback that one becomes, because obviously different stakeholders also have different agendas.
Thank you very much, Alessia, and Andreas raised his hand, so please speak up.
Just one comment. Yes, and I would like to, following what Alessia said, I just would like to say that we spent quite some time actually with stakeholders, and they are from different backgrounds. So industry representatives, but also civil society stakeholders who actually constantly ask us, either ask us about why we have made certain assumptions in our modeling exercises, or what certain output means. So, and I think this is absolutely necessary. And of course, we are there for this. We do that. It takes quite some of our time, I must agree. But if this helps, I think it's worth it, because what we have noticed is, of course, that there were also misunderstandings here and there. So stakeholders, maybe it was our communication that was not succinct enough. So, but understanding what a modeling result actually means is, and how we use it is already quite helpful. But just to make you aware, it's quite some time we invest in this, talking to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Andreas, for this intervention and comment. So we are a bit late with our time, so I would close it now and move forward. And in saying that, I'm super happy with this interesting discussion, but we also would like to activate our audience again. And this is what Vasilis is going to do. So Vasilis, the floor is yours.
Yes, Andre, and I would like to invite again our audience. Same process as earlier. You can now all see my screen, hopefully. And just go again to slido.com, same password as earlier, or again through this QR code. And please, we would like to know what, in your opinion, makes energy models relevant for policymaking. Okay, I see we have a first response. Key threshold is third-party confirmation, open source models, and genuinely open data. Addressing their questions, please. Right scope and the ability to answer the questions raised by a policy proposal. Yes. They can consider a lot of aspects of the energy grid and energy consumption and production. Yes. Give insight into possible impacts of climate change on investment ideas in the power sector. Very nice. Policymakers has to trust modelers. Results reliability, validity, and relevance. Yes, very nice. Coming from the right trusted organization. Okay. Proven track record of a model. I think that is a very nice response, but always very triggering, I would say. So yeah, we might discuss more about that in our second round. Convergence of the results from different models. Yes, excellent. I would agree to this one. Ability to reconcile market forces with political constraints, also very interesting and very right to the point. Okay, I don't know, Andre, because we have some time constraints. Maybe we can.
Yes, I agree. Yeah. So please stop sharing your screen. Thanks a lot for this exercise. And following up on that, I would like to pose a different question to our speakers, also referring to some of the aspects that have been mentioned, but maybe to answer them more explicitly. So what are the conditions that foster and hinder the use of energy models in policymaking? And here I would like to address this question to Olivia.
Okay, thank you. Everyone can hear me? Okay. I think that one of the big challenges in our case to support policy making in the sense of infrastructure assessment and selection of projects of common interest, for example, is that we need to go much beyond adding energy on a yearly basis at a European level. We need to dive into the balance of energy in time and space, which means balancing the electricity system and now actually an hydrogen system across the 8,760 hours of a year, and if possible, taking into account several climatic cures. So here, certainly one of the obstacles we have is first how to define a European mix of energy or energy carriers or energy sectors. So this is as such a first modeling exercise. Here we do not rely on model like primes, times. We rather go through public consultation, and then we translate this scenario into a granularity that enable infrastructure assessment. So we think that here clearly our contribution is this ability to tackle the balance of energy at a very low level or highly detailed level, and we think it's very important also because in a system which is much more complex and much more dependent on the climate, not only on demand, but also on the supply side, the balance of energy can question some output of higher level scenarios which are done on rather on yearly basis. Because things may make sense when we manipulate LCOE, but can no longer make sense when you try to balance the energy system and to combine carbon neutrality with security of supply. So we think that maybe what is hindering the use of modeling is how certain policymakers are of the robustness of the modeling result, because I think that they are fully aware that at the same time we speak about the possible risk on today present security of supply. So to say that the future with carbon neutrality, everything will be fine when we are facing already today some challenges in terms of security of supply, when we have flexible generation, I think that many people perceive that we need to assess not only carbon neutrality, but at the same time security of supply. And as long as we have not found the best way to cut the overall problem into different pieces that different entities can model and reuse the output of one model to be used in the other, and to authorize the downstream model to re-question some of the input. And I think also people have to accept that when someone questions what you've done, it's not a personal accusation. Sometimes it's bringing a new insight, and we should all try to see what we have in common in our model, rather than only focusing on the differences between models, differences between scenarios, because I think that between now and 2030, 35 at least, most of the time, what we all need to do is pretty clear. Yeah, so I would say that in one word is to go till the level of detail that will combine security of supply and carbon neutrality, because I think a lot of people question carbon neutrality under the perspective of security of supply. So we need to show that we can combine both.
Thank you very much, Olivier, for this input. Very interesting from my perspective. And in that context, what you have mentioned about is, I would like to pose a next question is about modelers and how the modelers can actually make the energy models more relevant for policy making. And these questions I would like to address to Andreas. Also, maybe he can share his thoughts on that. The floor is
okay, then as we are already a bit late, try to be quick. I think it's not the models, but it's the output. It's the product that is done with the models that is relevant, more or less relevant. Models as such are just tools, and they are all relevant or more or less relevant, and some are simpler, others are more sophisticated. But the relevance, I think, is not so much in the tool. Of course, some are better in a way than others, but it's more in the question that you try to model. And indeed, this is a bit difficult. Why is this difficult? Because ideally, if you are a modeler who wants to sell the model to the political arena, you need to be extremely well connected, but you also need to be able to forecast political behavior, because the modeling exercise, because if I look at what Alessia just showed some 10 minutes ago, where we're coming from and the acceleration of policy making and some questions during the last years, not all modelers predicted that. So I can assure you that some modelers, for instance, underestimated the political and, let's say, the importance of certain technologies or developments, and, for instance, neglected certain investments in their models. So, just give you an example, there used to be different booms and busts about hydrogen in the last 20 or 25 years. And it's visible since a few years that we now have rediscovered this technology because it provides a very important solution. And some have not seen that. Some have not seen that. And then if you want to be in the game and offer your services, but cannot offer a feature which is now crucial because I mean, I don't know, I forgot to count how many member states have now launched their own hydrogen strategies, but you don't have a good representation of that, then, well, then it's a bit sad. Then you're not really well in the game. You're not, yeah. And so but in order to know that, you would have had to have very good feeling for how political goals develop. You would have had to predict that there will be a 55% greenhouse gas abatement political goal. So the best modeler has some kind of tool predicting politics. And if you have this, you can then draw your conclusions for what your tool actually needs to be able to do. Thanks.
Thank you very much for this statement, which I find interesting in the context of the difficulty of forecasting the political developments. And I think that in this context, it's relevant to ask the policymaker among our speakers what is his stance on that. So, Jörg, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I can personally subscribe to a lot of things that Andreas and Olivier just mentioned. In particular, I would also like to push the case for open source modeling and open licenses, because in our point of view, CAN Europe supports this approach. On the long term, it increases the robustness, the credibility of models used. The results are more comparable. There are third parties that can double check and work on the base of those results. So that goes without saying that we as NGOs, we would support further use of open source modeling and open licenses. In addition to that, I would like to maybe get back once again to my initial remark on the power play, on the balancing of power in a societal sense, not in terms of adequacy of the electricity system, obviously. Who defines which questions are posed to the model? As Andreas rightly pointed, it is the input also that matters, and who defines when we ask what, when we want to know what details from certain models. In that regard, I think there is an interesting proposal that is discussed regarding the institutional setting, the governance of these modeling and scenario building processes. There is the concept of having an independent scientific body to guide or to steer to a certain extent these processes, and also improve the societal acceptance, the acceptability of these processes by increasing also the consultation in a systematic way. We see to a certain extent this scientific independent body also enshrined in the European climate law. It has been discussed in the context of the revision of the 10E regulation, which is the kind of rules of play for scenario building, infrastructure planning in the EU. And that would be interesting to maybe get also feedback from other stakeholders in this panel or from the participants with regards to potential institutional reorganization of this scenario building and modeling on the EU level.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for this input. And since we are slowly running out of time, I would like to open now the discussion among our speakers, whether you would like to comment or to refer to any of the the inputs of your colleagues. So Jörg already has done it, but also maybe Olivia, Andreas, and Alessia, who we lost for a bit, but I think that Alessia is now back. So please raise your hands if you would like to speak up. I don't see any hand raised. So in that case, I would like to use the opportunity and again to see and address some questions raised by the audience. And Diana, you were controlling the chat, so any questions that you selected?
Thanks. Yes, we had two questions that actually dealt with aspects that cannot be well modeled yet. So what is about inputs that are not included in models, specifically regarding social and behavior aspects? We talked about already about end consumer behavior. What is the issue there? And what should be also the responsibility from the different stakeholders to maybe get better data, to have them openly available, and issues also of privacy?
Okay, thank you.
Alessia, yes.
Thank you very much. And Alessia raised her hand. So please, the floor is yours.
Yes. This is actually a very, very interesting question, and it's indeed something which we in one of the Horizon projects called indeed New Trends are trying to analyze, because indeed in many countries now, in particular in Italy and Poland and several others, smart meters are, for example, making a way, and people sort of big data scientists are trying to analyze the outcomes, obviously anonymized, etc., to ensure for privacy. And there are also other projects, such as another project called Y, in which indeed these are exactly the elements which are trying to be included in the model, and I'm sure that there are many others, in where we try and see all this new data, that through all this big data is being analyzed, how this can be used in the models in order to improve the aspects of the behavior of agents in the modeling. Because indeed, I mean, this is one of the issues we try to do in primes. It is indeed one of the elements that we try to include as much as possible, the reactions of the end users in the to policies, to investors, etc., decision making, etc. So indeed, this is one of the things that are being analyzed. Obviously, getting hold of the data is not always easy. Then it might be only very local data, so only for specific areas, either generally not even for a whole country. And therefore then extrapolating in order then to comply with the Commission request of having EU 27 country results is always an interesting challenge for us modelers.
Thank you very much, Alessia. And any other of our speakers would like to refer or to answer some of these questions? No, I don't see anyone.
I mean, Andre, I have one question from the chat from the earlier session. I mean, and it was a particular question about how do you make sure policymakers found about the different energy models, right? Which I find pretty interesting, actually. Also with all these discussions about transparency, openness.
So basically, the question is
how we make sure that policymakers can find about all the different energy system models.
That's a good question, and Andreas, I wanted to address this question to you. You raised your hand, so it fits perfectly. The floor is yours.
I would like to say it's impossible to find out about all existing models. I mean, this is really how could we do? I mean, we're having events like the one today exactly to bring modelers and policymakers a bit closer. And we have found it. I mean, there is this energy and climate, ECEMWF, so the energy and climate European Climate Energy Modeling Forum, right? Which has been launched exact as a project, as an EU-funded project, exactly for this purpose. So no, it's not possible. But what you can do, of course, is react to calls. I mean, and there are quite a few. So yes, we get unsolicited offers from many parties to perform modeling, even free of cost from time to time. We're made aware of development, and there's so much. So I don't think it's possible to follow all that. We try our best, but so I think it's something like getting attention through delivering something, or being involved and replying to calls, things like this. Nothing else is possible.
Hey, thank you very much. Any other reactions to that? If not, I know that Diana spotted another relevant question.
Yeah, one from the chat and also to the answers. Actually, it directly follows up, Andreas, on what you said. I mean, we conducted also the study, right? I presented earlier, and we still found out that a lot of policymakers like follow up on the same organization, relying kind of on well-known models with a proven track record. What can now all the modeling teams actually do to develop all these cool open source models, want to bring in more transparency to get actually a higher policy impact? What are your stakes here?
Thank you very much.
Shall I take that one?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we came from the other end. I mean, we actually started a number, and I mean, the Commission, not necessarily NR. So there's a lot of work done. Gratitude we need to give to RTD and certain people there for moving this forward. So yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, the whole conference we're in now exists started as a deliverable of one EU-funded project, and then it was decided to be kind of perpetualized. So, I mean, formally, it's of course part of a EU-funded conference, but of a EU-funded project. Every time it's another one organizing it, but we do that for exactly this reason. So actually, what needs to be done is some kind, or what helps is some kind of a structured dialogue, and that's why we have these exercises like this conference, the modeling forum, and yeah, in order to so. And you're talking about some kind of institutional inertia. I think we have developed quite a few things recently. And I think there we need to differentiate. We need to differentiate between, let's say, ongoing modeling exercises that are happening where one exercise builds on the last one, and studies that we commission in general. And there, I think there's quite a variety of models we have used and that are used for analysis that is done for, at least for the commission. I think it's like this for many institutions. That you have part of the modeling which is kind of where you have some continuity for good reasons, but this is complemented by others. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Andreas. We are slowly going to an end, but we have a buffer of a few minutes. So if there is any other question from the audience, please feel free to write it in chat, or maybe Diana Vasilis, you have spotted in the meantime any other that I haven't had a chance to see. And I'm not seeing that anything is popping up in the chat. So I would ask our speakers whether there is any final point that you would like to make at the end of this session. No, I don't see that. But in any case, to sum up, I would like to thank all of you for the active participation. I think from our perspective, it's extremely interesting subject to and not only to investigate from a research point of view, but also to improve the models themselves, and also bringing different stakeholders on board. And that was also the intention of this session, in inviting different speakers, so different perspectives could be presented on that. I like especially that several times it was mentioned this this aspect of collaborative and then transparent modeling, which we all agree about, that it's important to improve the models, but also to fit it into the policy making. And I'm happy that actually the day 3 of this conference and the plenary session will be dedicated to this subject. So I think it is a very good follow-up on the conclusions that we have made. And the project of the Energy and Climate Modeling Forum, this project will be responsible for the next EMP, so for the gathering of the modeling community. So it's also a very good connection. And now I see that Olivier raised his hand. So please speak up, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, just to use the opportunity to thank one more time, and also to tell you that we have both the chance and the burden to have, according to regulation, to produce European-wide scenario every other year. We are about to start early next year for the T1EP 2024, as soon as finished with scenarios 2022. So if any of people present today want to engage with us to discuss about modeling, how to better picture through modeling some specific aspect of the energy model, they should not hesitate to contact us. And to see where we are today, I think we've released the draft scenarios early October, the methodology guidelines, where our model is explained in full detail. Very happy to discuss to see how we can together further improve our model.
Thank you very much. I think that at least one of our speakers here, Jörg, will be definitely interested in contributing to that. And other than that, to all the speakers and to all people joining the sessions, if you have any additional questions or remark or feedback that you would like to share with us about this session, feel free to do so, and contact us by email or by B2Match platform, which is also possible within this conference. We will be present for the next 2 days, and your feedback will be helpful for us to proceed with our own research and with the next steps that we would also like to do within the Sentinel project. And we will try to keep you updated. So thank you very much. Thank you to all invited speakers that dedicated the time and that they prepared for this session. Thank you to my colleagues who presented the results of our research, but also supported me with the facilitation and the technical aspects of organizing this session. And I wish you nice the rest of this afternoon and the 2 other days of the conference, and I'm sure that we will stay in touch. So thank you very much, and with that I'm closing this session, and yeah, see you within the next 2 days. Bye.